live from the Coachella Valley. Time for another hour of the desert scene. Art exhibitions to modernism, music festivals to live theater, big screen, little screen, and very little screen. This is the Culture Corner with Bonnie Gilgallon and Brayan Mendoza. Here's Bonnie and Brayan on iHub Radio.
And we are back, and we wanted to just start out by doing a quick reminder again about Desert Rose Playhouse and Robbie Wayne, our dear friend who runs that wonderful place. They've, of course, moved to the old Zelda's building in Palm Springs and worked very hard to completely renovate it. It's gorgeous. They're not quite done. They're still working. They're working 24 hours a day, and they need help. They started a GoFundMe campaign. It's just very expensive to renovate a space like that, and they've got like $15,000 worth of bills for plumbing, electric, and contracting work. They've got to get all that done to pass inspection next week, and they need your help. They need people to buy tickets, to donate, and to also come volunteer to paint, hammer, help clean out the place, whatever. For ticketing or to donate, you can go to desertroseplayhouse.org. And there is a GoFundMe campaign, gofundme.com/Desert Rose Playhouse. They really need your help. It's a wonderful space, wonderful theater. They do great shows, and it's going to be a great addition to the Valley. So please help if you can.
You know, I was going to say, just to remind everybody, like earlier in the show I always say that if you're an investor, feel free to come in and talk to Robbie Wayne and talk about it.
He'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a great community theater, great theater production in general that you need to really, we got to save it. We got to save it.
Get them open.
It'd be a loss to the community. But, you know, when talking about theater, why don't we talk about one of the legends of both film and theater, Judy Garland. Judy Garland, yesterday was
her birthday, right?
Her birthday. She would have turned 99 years old today. So next, if she had been alive. Now, Judy Garland, you know, everybody knows who she is. But if you don't know, Judy Garland is a legend of film and television. I would say television, too, because of the Judy Garland show. Even though it lasted one season, it was still pretty good, in my opinion. She had guests on. She's had some legendary performances, like with
she had Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
Bunch of people. And I think Julie Andrews. I think she's had a bunch of people on.
Oh, yes. Yes, she had Julie Andrews, and another legend. You know, legends among legends. And Judy Garland, in my opinion, some of her best work include The Wizard of Oz, which is my actual favorite movie of all time, The Wizard of Oz. Meet Me in St. Louis. I certainly love Judgment at Nuremberg. She got nominated for an Academy Award for that movie, where she played a young woman who basically has to relive her trauma of being the wife of a Jewish man that was killed during the Holocaust.
You know, I've never seen that. I've got to see that.
That movie, she gives a really strong performance, and what I like about it is that there's this moment where I don't want to spoil it, but she has to sit on the stand, and she shakes the microphone at the stand in a way that's so impactful, and you almost want to cry because of how strong it is. And she's also done movies like Easter Parade, Summer Stock.
She was a hell of an actress. Sometimes she's underappreciated as an actress, I think.
I think so too. Like even in her day with A Star Is Born, when she lost to Grace Kelly. And I don't like to do that thing that a lot of other people do, which is call Grace Kelly a lesser actress. I don't believe so. I believe Grace Kelly was a great actress on her own.
She's very different.
Yeah, exactly, like a very different actress. So when she won for The Country Girl in 1954, I thought that was her best performance on her own terms. I think Grace Kelly deserves her own thing. But I think that year I would have voted for Judy Garland in A Star Is Born, because there's that beautiful monologue. I don't know if you remember, where she talks about how she's trying to help out Lester Norman, I believe that's the name of the character. She's trying to help out her husband in that movie, and she goes on about how she can't help him and that she loves him, and it's a strain on her, but she has to live with that.
Yeah.
And I think the final line of A Star Is Born, I know they changed it for the Lady Gaga version and the Barbara Streisand version, but the final line, the way she delivers it, I cry every time I see it, because it's just that impactful.
I don't, and I've forgotten the final line. Remind me.
And my name, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's an older movie, so excuse me for spoiling an older movie.
It's okay.
So she's like, hello everybody. This is Mrs. Norman Maine. when she accepts the award for her I think the
Okay.
tribute for her husband.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is Mrs. Norman Maine, and everybody applauds, and I think it's such a great finale. And it's not because she, is subservient to her man, but because the fact that she is going to continue his legacy and love him enough to do that.
Right.
And I think that's one of the great things about that movie. And the AFI Institute named her the 8th greatest female screen legend of all time. And she won an Academy Award, like a tiny juvenile Academy Award, but she never won a formal one.
Mm-hmm.
So over the years, Judy Garland has become sort of a legend and even an icon in the LGBT community, and most people even say that her death might have sparked the Stonewall riots, because the Stonewall riot happened the day that she died.
See, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that connection. Okay.
So for years, people have always said, the gays were so mad that Judy Garland died that they attacked the cops that came in. And when I'm like, okay, that's not
a little bit of a stretch there. Yeah.
It's just a coincidence. And but it is a connection there. And I've seen interviews where Judy Garland has had. She acknowledged her gay fan base. I'm gonna be honest. She acknowledged it, but she wasn't like over the moon about it. She's like, they're gay men. Yeah. But I'm sure she's had an interesting life in itself, because her dad was gay. Her father is gay.
As I recall, as I remember reading a biography about her at one point, didn't she have a very contentious relationship with her mother? Wasn't her mother like a stage mother, and they had some issues? Yeah. I
think I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of, like, with one exception, a lot of older movie stars have had bad stage mothers. Mm-hmm. And the only one I could think of that was an exception was Shirley Temple. Mm-hmm. That Shirley Temple's mother apparently was very protective. And even in the case of, like, Haley Mills, which was in a different era of film, she also had a father that was more protective. Whereas in the case of Judy Garland's mother, she's like, okay, you gotta put her on drugs.
Pushed her, yeah.
And she didn't care. Like, you gotta put Judy on uppers, do it.
Whatever it takes to get the film and get the whatever. I just have to bring this up because it just popped in my head. And I guess it must have been on her television show. I once saw, that I'm sure you can Google it, of Judy Garland. It was just hilarious. She was sitting at a table in an apartment, and she's singing Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. The apartment catches on fire, and she keeps on singing, and the firemen come in with their hoses and they carry her out. It's hilarious. That is so funny. And she keeps on singing. She never breaks character once. It's hilarious.
I actually think that that's one of my favorite things about her, is that there's her show had a lot of creativity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of that show was Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, because she's just sitting there funny. Like... And the thing is, though, even though the show ran for 26 episodes, it had a lot of problems because there would be different showrunners. Like George Solater directed the first 5 episodes. Another person produced the next episodes 6 to 13. And then finally, the rest of the show is produced by someone else. So even though
there's no continuity, really.
No continuity on that end. But there's debates about which era is the best. I haven't, to be honest with you, I think all of it's pretty consistently good. Mm-hmm. But I think towards the end, I can kind of see why the show fell apart, because of the fact that the ratings went down the drain. But also, even though fans wanted to save it and they rallied for it, I think at that point, I think that the variety show was
on its way out a little bit anyway.
Yeah, it was on its way out, but also because the variety show, it was not just on its way out, but I think it was overdone. Like, I think
too many people were doing them.
Overdoing it, yes, of course. And I think Judy Garland had a certain type of variety hour that people really loved, but I think maybe, like, let's say you're watching it and maybe, like, there's another variety show where there's more comedy in it. You might
switch the station.
You might switch there instead of a comedy hour. It had comedy too, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's just that it also had music tied into it, and depending.
Can we talk about her voice for just a minute? We talked about this off air. Judy Garland is known as a legend, and she was absolutely. No one's going to deny that. And she was somebody who just poured her guts out on stage in a song. That's one of the reasons people loved her is she connected with her audience, and that's important as a performer. But especially as she got older, I wasn't a big fan of her voice because it's just a lot of vibrato at times, and sometimes she could get strident. She could get a little strident, and and I just to sit and listen to her, especially when she got older. I don't love her voice. I mean, she poured her guts out. I mean, that there's no questioning that. But I just her particular style of voice didn't do it for me.
Let me ask you, Bonnie. Do you think the earlier stuff is better, like Wizard of Oz and Meet Me in St. Louis?
I liked her better as a singer in Wizard of Oz. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think for me, like I think from what please correct me, but I think a part of it could be that towards the end of her life,
she was doing a lot of stuff. Yeah,
the drugs,
booze, yeah,
the drugs. I think I know you said that she puts everything in there, but I think it was at a point towards the end that it was everything.
Yeah,
and that. Do you feel like you felt like it was uncomfortable for you listening to her voice at that point?
Now, I really don't. I mean. It was tough, I think, to watch towards the end to watch because I think people knew that she was sort of having a breakdown at that point.
Yes,
but it wasn't that the emotion made me uncomfortable. That's not it. It takes a lot for emotion to make me uncomfortable. It just was the sound of her voice. I mean, I've seen people. I heard singers who could be very emotional, but just had great instruments also.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a beautiful sound in addition to being... I mean, a great example of that is Paul Robeson doing Old Man River.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
I mean, you hear Paul Robeson doing Old Man River. To me, once he did that, you don't have to do anything else the rest of your life. He's poured his guts out, but it was a great sound, too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing about Judy Garland is that, towards the end of her career, I think people tend to forget that the self-destructiveness was apparent. And there's a movie that came out 2 years ago called Judy, which I sat in
Renee
Zellweger, and I sat there and said, you know what, my problem with this is that it wanted to be a tribute to Judy Garland, but it didn't want to capture the real her. And I feel like if you want to capture Judy Garland, you gotta show her at their most pain.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to exploit it,
but you got to see a little bit of it to be realistic.
Yeah, and I feel also that they made a mistake in that movie having her sing. Mm-hmm. Instead of dubbing in Judy Garland. And I also think that towards the end of her career, Judy Garland it was just a lot of pain. And also, like, when you see her final performance, like one of her final movies, A Child Is Waiting, you can see like this real pain in her eyes that's very hard to avoid. And I think that when you watch her movie careers, you see a tapestry of her life story, like Wizard of Oz, the peak, or Meet Me in St. Louis, the sort of like struggling young girl. Mm-hmm. You see all these, the way her movies almost tell her story. Wizard of Oz, a girl lost, trying to find herself. Meet Me in St. Louis, a girl falling in love and trying to seek out a normal life. A Star Is Born, a self-destructive story, a story. And then Judgment at Nuremberg, things are starting to get bad. And then A Child Is Waiting, life is getting worse.
Yeah, I think you have a point there, yeah.
It's a tapestry.
Yep.
But and that's those are the movies I recommend. Those specific movies, and also The Clock, which is her first non-singing dramatic role about a woman who falls in love with a man within the span of an hour. Okay. And it's a great movie on TCM. Check it out when you get a chance.
All right. We're back with much more on the Culture Corner right after this.
The curtain rises on local and regional arts and entertainment. From music to theater, films to fine art, it's the Culture Corner. Get connected. Call 760-544-TALK. That's 760-544-8255. Here's Bonnie and Brayan on iHub Radio.
And with the pandemic still kind of lingering its ugly head around
lingering,
here.
yes.
We're getting to the end of it, but I also believe that we're still not exactly in the middle of it, but towards the end of the second act. Not quite in the third act.
Yeah.
But a lot of governments have actually decided to start opening things up and start loosening up restrictions, including here in California. In literally 4 days, California will drop a lot of restrictions and essentially be reopened. So there's that. And our next story actually does relate to that. So Andrew Lloyd Webber, who we all know as the composer of Phantom of the Opera, Evita, Jesus Christ Superstar, Cats.
A number of shows, yeah.
Now, I'm going to play a little guessing game with you. What do you think all these shows have in common? If there's one element about all these shows that you can name, other than the composer, they're very weird shows, all separate. What do you think is a defining quality of all his shows?
Let me think for a second. I was trying to think if they're, based on something else, but no, Jesus Christ Superstar wasn't based on something else.
Like maybe the Bible.
Yeah, okay, you're right.
Oh, that's a good guess, but it's something else, like something technical.
Something technical.
Or even, just a guess. We'll see. I'll have the answer.
Well, I mean, they're all very majestic in their own way. All, no, Phantom doesn't have that large a cast, I guess.
Hey, you actually hit it there. Large.
Okay.
They're all big musicals.
Big productions.
Musics.
Yeah.
So, I was going to say, I know we talked earlier about like smaller productions and all that. Now, can you think of a practical way, in your opinion, for musicals like Phantom of the Opera require huge chandeliers
and stuff, yeah,
and Cats, which requires literally like giant set because there's a flying wheel at the end of it, or in the case of like Starlight Express, which is maybe his worst musical.
That's a whole different thing, yeah.
A whole skating ring, and Evita, which requires like crowds. Yeah. Do you think there's any practical way, in your opinion, that they can do that during restrictions right now? Like, if you can, is there any way? Let's be honest.
I think it would be tough.
It would be tough. Yeah. I think so too. So Andrew Lloyd Webber said that he said in an interview that he is going to try to reopen all the theaters on starting June 25th, all his West End theater productions of Cinderella, because Cinderella is starting to do previews. And at the West End Theatre in UK, which is the equivalent of the UK equivalent of Broadway. Yes, for those of you who don't know, but I'd be surprised if you don't know, you're listening to the show. But according to this, the government said they might have to push it back maybe a few days and all that, which I'm not surprised that they will, because of the fact that there's a COVID variant, the Delta COVID variant, and Andrew Lloyd Webber is furious about it, saying that he thinks it's impossible to open up his shows and those restrictions. And he has stated, we can open safely. Please let us open. And he said, they can come to our theater and arrest me. And that is actually the statement that has been going around. He said he is ready to get arrested if his theaters open up.
Now, so let me just clarify some details here. So he doesn't want any restrictions like number of audience or seating or anything like that? He wants no restrictions? No restrictions.
And I think the restrictions in his eyes are not necessarily the audience, but the amount of people on stage.
On stage, okay.
Yes. And I think that's I think we often forget about the audience is not the only amount of people.
Exactly.
It's on stage. So I do want to sympathize a little tiny bit with Andrew Lloyd Webber. Like, I get it. Like, his musicals are big, and there is this pressure to have these big musicals by him. And because I don't think when you go to an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical that you expect it to be small scaled. I've been to a production of Phantom with a small chandelier, and it doesn't hit the same. The chandelier was about as small as this, a little bit smaller than this table, for example. That's how small it was. And this table was actually 2 times bigger than that chandelier. And oh my God, like, I get that, but I also believe that he needs to be. He probably should. I don't know. It's a hard question for me to answer. Like, it's a hard thing to answer. I get his sentiment, but it's also like, I think he could afford to be a little bit patient.
Yes, it's not like he's starving, number one. Yeah, and it's like we've all waited so long. And, if you maybe he should figure out a way to branch out and find or write or create some smaller cast shows for now.
Yeah.
Try something new. Try something small with, 5 or 6 people in the cast instead of, and just see. I mean, because here's the thing. It's really comes down to just about the people that were punching people out about wearing masks. This is a life or death situation, and you're talking about people's lives and their health, and putting off having a big musical for another month or so for Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's not starving to death. If he can't do that, then he's being selfish.
Yeah, and what shocked me was about how his attitude changed, because in the beginning of the pandemic, he was like, I'm going to put on some free shows online. Let's get some free recordings, put them online for 48 hours on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a great attitude, Andrew Lloyd Webber. Yeah. That really is. And I respect Andrew Lloyd Webber a lot for a lot of reasons. I respect his...
Yeah, he's amazingly talented, yeah.
I respect his statements about how diversity is important. I respect his craft, too. Like, they're big musicals, but they're still quality. I, however... feel like this is the wrong move for him, and also I feel like, again, you're not starving.
No,
you're not starving.
Hello.
And he could, and he could save some smaller theater productions if he wanted to.
Absolutely,
too.
That's what he should do.
But all right, we'll be right back.
Yes.
You're listening to Bonnie Gilgallon and Brayan Mendoza, talking arts and entertainment on iHub Radio's The Culture Corner. Live from the desert cities of Southern California, here's Brayan and Bonnie.
And we are back on the Culture Corner, and now we're joined by Carol Teitelbaum, who's a very interesting woman. I've run into at a couple of, events like Women's Leaders Forum and that kind of thing. And she, there are 2 different things we want to talk about today. One is she is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's the president of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and chairs the It Happens to Boys project, which is about helping men and teen boys who've been abused as children, because it does happen to boys too. And then we also want to talk about a book that she's written. Hi, Carol. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So let's talk about your therapy work first. Obviously, you've had quite a career as a therapist. How did you get involved in sort of specializing, if you will, on helping men and teens who've been abused as children? How did that? Is that what you started out specializing in, or did that evolve?
Well, I started studying child abuse back in 1985, a long time ago, and with Alice Miller, who's one of the leading abuse survivor workshop authors back then. She was really well known. She wrote the drama The Gifted Child and The Body Always Remembers, and I studied with her, and she talked a lot about perpetrators, and then she talked about what happens to the body, what happens to relationships. And so I've always worked with survivors from back when, that's when I got licensed in 1985. But then I was on the DA's Committee for Child Abuse back in the 1990s, and the doctor who was in charge of Eisenhower's emergency room said, I'm seeing that there's a lot less boys reporting sexual abuse than there are girls. And I have a hunch that that's not really the case. And he said, what do you think? And I was the co-chair of the Coachella Valley Child Abuse Council then. And I said, you know what, I'll take that back to our council and see if they'll take that on as a project. And we did, and we had a billboard, and we had flyers, and we got postcards made. And one of the men in my group did the art for the postcards and for the billboard. And then after a while, I decided that I was going to take this even further, and I have a conference every year. It happens to boys, and we have some of the most amazing speakers like John Bradshaw, John Lee, Patrick Carnes, who's the leading sexual addiction therapist there is in the world, and Claudia Black. And every time I called, and Dave Pelzer, who wrote A Child Called It, and every time I would call someone, I would say, we can't afford your salary. I know that you're amazing and you make a lot of money, but we can't afford it. And when I told them what I was doing, they said, we'll help you. And they reduced their fees so much. And then we started a group for men who started, this was 13 years ago. We've been doing this. We go out to recovery centers. We speak at colleges and middle schools. It's just grown and grown and grown since then. And the reason that, everybody asks me, you're a woman, why are you dealing with men who've been abused? But the statistics are 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys are sexually abused by the time they're 18.
Wow.
And
wow.
what I tell people is there's a lot of untreated male sexual abuse survivors going around out there. And what happens to them, because they feel so shamed that they don't feel like they can talk about it, because they've been told ever since they were little kids, buck up, be a man, don't cry,
right.
don't share your feelings, don't ask anybody for help. So they are told that if you admit this, you're not a real man.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't feel like they can tell anybody. So what I tell people is their feelings turn to rage. And women are not the same, but for men, the feelings they push down turn to rage, and that's road rage, domestic violence, child abuse.
Right.
And then they turn to drug and alcohol to make that shame go away.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't help the men, they're going to continue to hurt women and children.
Right. Exactly.
And that's why I do what I do. That's a long version.
Yeah. So have you found over the years since you've been doing this, does it seem like the stigma has been reduced a little bit? Are you finding that at all?
A little bit, but not that much.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is there's a big case. We actually got called when Penn State happened. We got called to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happened, it was all, everybody talked about it. Everybody wanted to do something about it. They said they were going to do a lot of things about it, and we're going to have a conference, and they were so excited they could talk to me. And then as it continued on, they actually told me, you can come to our conference, but you got to pay your own way. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Wow. Yeah.
You want me to pay my own way? I don't think that's right. And then when Sandusky was found guilty, I got a call again. They said, okay, everybody's fine now, right? He was found guilty. I go, no, their healing is just starting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what happens when somebody's in the news. Everybody's talking about it. As soon as it's off the news, it goes underground again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people have told me the most outrageous thing, like boys can't be abused or they just get over it. It's not a big deal. And it is a big deal. It is a really big deal.
Absolutely. Carol, my co-host Brayan has a question for you.
Now,
Okay.
I actually had a question for you because, funny enough, there was this, actually not funny enough because it isn't funny in my opinion. It's actually really sad. There was a story recently published about Kevin Spacey who was accused of sexual assault and his victim was men, right? His victims were young men as opposed to women. Now, I wanted to ask you, do you think Kevin Spacey actually got rehired for another movie role? Which is something that I've noticed has not happened to other people who have been accused of sexual assault if their victim was a woman so far. So I wanted to ask So I wanted to ask your thoughts on that, but I also wanted to ask, do you think in a lot of cases, even though it's already hard enough to sort of to persecute people who have raped women, do you think it's difficult enough do you think in some cases it's more difficult to persecute
if it's a man?
If the victim was a man?
Yes, it is. Because I say that all the time, and I'm glad you brought that up. When it's a woman, there's not even a question that he should be punished, that he's wrong. In fact, it's going so far over the other way that, men can barely smile at someone without somebody getting upset about it.
Yeah.
So we don't want it to go so far over the other way that we punish our men or look badly on them, because it's not all men that are like that. It's the few perpetrators that are like that, not all men. All men are not bad.
Right.
And I really want people to hear that. But yes, and even for men who are abused by a woman, they give them a high five. They don't go, oh, that was awful. It's so misunderstood, and there's so many myths about what it means when a boy is abused. And then if he's abused by a man, he questions his sexuality because, okay, then
right.
Did I want it? Do I go out? I mean, am I man enough? And then they usually go out and have sex with lots of women to prove
something. Yeah, Carol, what? Because I want to talk about your book in just a second. If someone wanted to get a hold of you, maybe to have you come speak or do a program about this issue, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
They can send me an email at catbaum, C-A-T, B like in boy, A-U-M, like in Mary, at earthlink.net.
Okay. I want to switch gears for a second while we have you to talk about, you're also an author, and you've authored a lot of articles and a lot of an author with your husband, Robert, and you have this book, Hiding in Plain Sight, A Personal Window into Organized Crime in the 1920s through the 50s. Tell us about that and how you came up with that subject matter.
Okay, we got to switch gears real quick.
Yeah.
My husband's parents were Al Capone's attorneys, along with 14 other members of the Chicago outfit. They started out in law school at John Marshall Law School in Chicago, and they graduated in 1928. And my mother-in-law's uncle was the attorney for Al Capone, and he had a $30,000 gambling debt with them he couldn't pay. Mm-hmm. And so the mob started coming, and then he hot-footed it out of town and left everybody holding the bag. And the mafia came after my husband's grandparents, threatening them if they didn't pay. And so here's my mother-in-law, and she wasn't married to my father-in-law, but they were friends, and they had just graduated, and they said, okay, if they become our attorneys, we'll let the debt go.
Wow.
So through a to fate and a gambling debt, they became the attorneys for Al Capone and 14 other members of the Chicago outfit. So my husband and I heard all these stories for years and years and years separately together. One told us one told us another one. And so we decided we might as well write the stories down. So that's what we did. So this is really a book about their relationships with all these different clients, Al Capone, Bugsy Siegel, all these people who everyone's so fascinated about. And he grew up at the Loveless Ranch in Indio. It was built for Franklin Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. And he never took possession because he passed away, but Eleanor came out and said it's too damn hot here, so she left. And Walter Kirshner sold it to my father-in-law. So that's where he grew up, on this big gate ranch on Madison and 111. It's been torn down now, but the foundation is still there, mm-hmm. and you can see kind of where the pool was and everything. Yeah. And they had these huge parties with elected officials and the mafia. And
wow.
All together.
So a question about the book. So were you concerned at all? I know a lot of these people have passed away at this point, but were you concerned at all about... did you feel free enough to be totally honest? Were you concerned about any relatives or heirs of people in the book being upset about any of it?
Well, one of our cousins was upset about it, but I said, Robert has a right to tell his story. We didn't we changed some of the names of people who we thought might not be happy with it, mm-hmm. but it's a story that needed to be told because it happened right here in the Coachella Valley. Mm-hmm. And, people know there's other books that were written about the Coachella Valley and how it was a no-kill zone, and the mafia didn't shoot each other here, and they could come and have meetings. And my husband grew up with all these people at the ranch coming in because it had 11-foot high walls all around it because of they had Secret Service in the house, and mm-hmm. it was all built for Roosevelt. So the mafia could come and have these meetings with 11 high-foot walls. So he grew up seeing all these people, on a regular basis, and fascinating. And it was also really tragic for him because they hired bodyguards to protect the kids, and one of the bodyguards actually sexually abused him.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
And his sisters.
Oh my gosh.
So what looked so perfect on the outside was not so perfect on the inside.
I'm just curious, why was the Palm Springs area considered a no-kill zone for mafia folks? That's interesting.
Because they could come here and relax and have fun. And they all agreed that this was a safe place for them to come and have meetings and not hurt each other.
Wow. That's it. Just that alone is interesting. Yeah. So when did the book come out? How long has the book been out?
It's been out 2 years.
Okay. And
my husband wrote another book called Frogs and Snails and Mob Tales, growing up in the shadow of Al Capone, and that's about his relationship with the parents and about his abuse. So that's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. All right. The website is Catbaum, CATBAU.
No, the website is creativechangeconferences.com.
Okay. I'm sorry, creativechangeconferences.com.
Yeah, my email is patbaum@earthlink.net.
Excellent. So they can find the book there, and also find out more about your work with therapy. And I think that is so great. It's work that needs to be done. Thank you for doing that, because it's something that you're right is not talked about enough. And the shame, I know shame is a big part of it. And thank you for helping so many men and their families deal with this. And congratulations, and also on the book too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you, Carol. Carol Teitelbaum. Check out the book, Hiding in Plain Sight. We'll be back with more on the Culture Corner in just a moment.
You're listening to Bonnie Gilgallon and Brayan Mendoza, talking arts and entertainment on iHub Radio's The Culture Corner. Here are Bonnie and Brayan.
And we are back, and I just want to get this one thing in. And we just spoke with Carol Teitelbaum, a fabulous guest, and we forgot to mention, she and her husband own a local publishing company, www.teitelbaum, and that's TEITELBAUM publishing.com, www.teitelbaumpublishing.com. That's where you can get the book, Hiding in Plain Sight. Okay.
Hey, so I was actually going to want to talk about, so there's an author named Elin Hilderbrand. Elin Hilderbrand. I always forget how to say her name, but she has written a lot of books that are very famous for being beach reads. You basically read it on the beach. It has, it's famous for its beach stories and all that.
Easy read. Yeah.
Easy reads, but they're still, I'm going to give her credit, they're still pretty complex books, and they're very thoughtful. Summer of 69 is a really good book, in my personal opinion, but even her newest book, which I've read bits and pieces of, is good. I think it's probably her best work, but it has gotten a lot of controversy, and even she admits maybe she made a mistake. So Elin Hilderbrand has asked for the Anne reference to be cut out of her book for future publishing and for digital release. And the reason why referencing Anne Frank in her book might not have been the best thing in the world is that she said she had a character who's planning on staying in her friend's attic. There's a part in it where a character talks about it, and she says, "You're suggesting I hide here like all summer?" Vivi asks. Like Anne Frank? This makes them both laugh, but it is really funny, and so is Viv so far off base. It's basically that it was an offhand...
It's not funny.
An offhand joke.
Yeah.
And again, I was quoting the book there, so I don't think necessarily it's funny, but the characters in the story,
that was
they
a
both
section
laugh.
of the book. Yeah, and it was bad taste. Yeah.
I think a lot of people have actually said that it was casual anti-Semitism, and they felt like she herself made it sort of like a throwaway line, sort of dismissive of the experience that she had. And even then, later on, she actually did form an apology and said, you know what? She said, it was meant to be hyperbolic because it was in the context of children, right? And she wrote, but it was a poor choice that was offensive and tasteless. Those of you who read Summer of 69 will realize Anne Frank was a courageous young woman whom I've revered, and her story remains deeply influential in my life. I will always strive to write in good faith. Golden Girl is a novel that I wrote for my children and wanted them to be proud of every word, but she has asked the publisher to remove it from the digital versions, and that from future printings you could technically go out and buy, if you want to have that passage in there, there are copies out there.
You could find it if you wanted to, yeah.
But in the next printing, it will not be on there.
Well, you know what? It was stupid and it was in bad taste, but you have to give her credit for acknowledging it, apologizing, and taking out a future copies. So that's good.
Yeah, and also I feel like this is a case of, like, I think we've heard this story a lot recently about authors who go back and realize, you know what, maybe that wasn't the best thing. I think that, again, just to reiterate, it's every right of an author to realize their mistake.
It's their material, and they have it's not cancel culture. It's nobody else taking it out. It's the author deciding on their own.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's great that she did that. Me personally, like, looking at the line, I understand why in the context of the line it was children saying it, but I also understand fully that, like, it was the character, the story of it, from my understanding, is that it's a woman watching over some children from, like, the beyond, like basically heaven, and that the older woman is kind of laughing at it too. So I kind of feel like if she wanted to contextualize it better, she could have those lines in there, but have the older woman who's watching over them to sort of be like, huh, that's not great.
Right.
Like, instead of sort of laughing along with it, I mean, I get...
Call them on it that it's not funny.
Yeah, call them on it, or have somebody say, like, oh my God, but that's... Like, I wish... Because I've seen conversations like this where someone... I've been in real life where someone would make a statement like, oh my God, it's staying at home, I feel like Anne Frank. And then someone saying, hey, you know what?
That's not cool. That's not funny.
She had...
Poor taste.
She had no choice. No choice, you know.
Because what happens is someone's going to read that book, or some teenager, some young person is going to read that book and think and see that section and think that this author thought that was okay, and they'll think it's funny, and then carry that on to someone else and think it's funny, and it's not.
And it also gives you the wrong impression of Hildenbrand, especially considering that when Summer of '69, her characters have a lot of respect for Anne Frank and like sympathize with her. So it's sort of like this weird thing where I think maybe she felt a little too comfortable in the story. Because in my personal opinion, like the Anne Frank story, I always tell people, you know, don't be very careful with how you admire that story. You know, don't like make jokes about it or feel too comfortable about it, because it is meant to be uncomfortable when you read it, though. Like, because it is her personal experiences, and and also not to like. I think in a lot of ways, even Anne Frank's father has said like he never felt like people should view her daughter as a hero, but to sort of view her story as sort of a story that needed to be told more so than anything. And so I think Hilderbrand probably got too comfortable with the material and decided, you know, I'm going to make a offhanded joke that teenagers would make. And I get that. But I also feel like when I watch stuff about teenagers are not as dumb as we make them out to be. You know, I feel like I've seen a lot of very authentic depictions of teenagers in which they're very respectful and very thoughtful, and some are, of course. Yeah. But even the ones, it's the framing device. For example, if the book framed those jokes as unfunny, then you could get away with it maybe because you're contextualizing it. It's like I've seen movies about racist teenagers, but in the story, it's made clear that they're the villains.
Exactly. That's the difference, yeah. And because here's the thing. There's really nothing funny about the Holocaust and Nazis. There's just not. You know, there's nothing funny about it. So
yeah, and the only person who got away with making any type of joke, wasn't even making fun of it directly, was, you know, Charlie Chaplin with The Great Dictator. But he was making fun of like dictatorships in general, but he wasn't making fun.
And that was a larger context, and that's different.
And also, I always tell people, if you're not Mel Brooks or Charlie Chaplin,
don't try it
because you're not talented enough to even try it.
Exactly.
And they're not even making the jokes that I've seen some people make. They're making jokes about at the expense of the bad people. So,
all right, let's talk something positive.
Right? Like, let's end our show on a positive note. Taraji P Henson is going to be playing Mrs. Hannigan on the upcoming NBC production of Annie Live.
It's
Annie Live, yes.
Oh, good, cool.
So Taraji P Henson, I think she'll be a great Mrs. Hannigan. Personally, we've talked about it. You've seen her in a couple things.
I've seen. Yes, I love her. I think she's great. What was the thing where she was the like the gangster's wife for the
Empire?
I saw a little bit of that. Yeah.
You might as well call that character a gangster because he is like a music producer, but he is very gangster-like.
Yeah. She's fabulous. I love her.
I love her too. I also loved her very much in Hidden Figures.
I did not see that.
You got to see that. That's a great. We got to watch that sometime. But I'm excited. Go Taraji P Henson.
Yay! And thank you so much to all our guests, to Jerome Elliott and Carol Teitelbaum. And please help out the Desert Rose Playhouse if you can. Go volunteer, buy tickets, donate. We love you, Robbie. All right, we'll be back with more next week.